we sleep, the guardians of the night take to the streets, having said goodbye to those they love. Each other knowing they may never say these words again, they face the evil that we run from. They dedicate their lives to those that would hate them because they wear the badge. They wear the badge not for the glory or recognition, but because they were born to honor the thin blue line. This is the LEO First Podcast. We'll talk to the men and women in law enforcement, those that have retired, and anyone who's impacted by law enforcement. We'll peel back the curtain, and you'll get the real stories. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Every law enforcement officer has a story to tell. Get ready to hear from the men and women who put their lives on the line every day for their communities and their country. Welcome to the LEO First Podcast. Now, here's your host, Michael Laidler.
Hey everybody, it's Michael Laidler, your host of the LEO First Podcast, and we are coming back to you for another amazing podcast. I have a guest on here that I've been watching for about a year or so, kind of keeping up with his career, really paying attention to what he has going on. And I'm happy to have the opportunity to have him on because one of the things that some of the listeners that are on right now is he's just transitioning from being a full-time chief to working in the private sector. And I know some of the things we're going to talk about today will not just benefit people that are in retirement, but people that are looking at how to take a law enforcement career or a career in a high-stress environment and successfully go from one to the other. I've been following this guy on Facebook. He's everywhere. I've been keeping up with his LinkedIn. He is just killing the game. And I'm so impressed on how quickly he's utilizing every resource he can to make it. So today we have Jason Armstrong on the show. He's 23 years in law enforcement. He just retired and he was able to get into doing more private sector work at a capacity that all of us want to get to. And now he's actually with Armstrong Consulting LLC. He even wrote a book the day after he retired. Now, we know timing. We know there's no way he could have done this in 24 hours, but we'll just say for the sake of argument, he did it in 24 hours. He has this book out now called I'm Done Here. And I know that a lot of the stuff that he's done, especially as a speaker, some of us wish we've done a lot earlier, but he is literally taking the bull by the horns and going full speed into this speaking world. And I know it'll be a delight. So without further ado, without me rambling, because you guys know I love to start off talking a lot about random things. I'm not going to do that during this show because I told him I'm going to try to keep this between 20 to 30 minutes for all of our attention span. So to make sure we're able to listen to the whole thing. And obviously 20 to 30 minutes is only a snapshot of what he has going on and what he has done in his life, but definitely will give you options on how to find him down the road. Jason, this is your time. Tell us what you want to talk about.
Mike, thanks for having me. So naturally, what I would love to talk about is just what I have going on career-wise now, with my transition and retiring from law enforcement. Releasing my book the day after I retired, and now what I do consulting, what I do speaking, what I do training. Absolutely want to talk about all of those things.
All right. So what you tell us where do you want to go from there? Do you want to start with the fact that and by the time people see this show, I know it's not going to be the exact day they see it, but you're 20 days out of law enforcement retirement. You're 20 days into the private sector. How has that been?
It's been a whirlwind for me because working for government is all that I know. Coming straight out of college, I went straight to work and I've been working in local government the entire time. And so announcing my retirement 6 months before I retired really was a strategy of mine for me to just kind of work through everything that I needed to work through and mentally prepare myself to not be in law enforcement anymore. And so for that day to finally get here and to come and just all of the emotions and everything that came along with it, it's been a whirlwind experience. One thing that helped was, I came out the gate just busy as all get out. A couple of days after I retired, I was getting on the plane headed to Canada to do a 2-day training up in Canada, and then get back from that. Then I was on a plane headed to Miami to speak at the police leadership training down there in the Miami area. So, I've been extremely busy and now just really focusing on the business and how are we going to grow this and build it out and what does 2025 look like for us. So just staying busy has really, really helped me with the transition.
Now, I did that South Florida Police Leadership Academy back in July myself, and how is it when you can speak on the things that you want to speak on versus when you have to speak as a chief?
So speaking wise, I would say for me, it's not a whole lot different. One thing that I highlight in the book and just who I always have been is authentic to myself.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been myself, and that's one thing that I've been praised for by some people, and that's also one thing that I've been ostracized for by other people. And so I absolutely would say a big part of my transition was wanting my freedom and wanting to be able to just, say whatever it is that I want to say or do whatever it is that I want to do, not having to think about the thousands of people in a specific community and worrying about what they may think about it or worrying about what elected officials are going to think about it and all the things that come, with being a police chief. But when I'm in front of people, when I'm talking about my experience in law enforcement, it's not very different from me sitting in the chief seat and me, just being in the private sector now. The story is the story. The experiences are the experiences, and I'm going to give them to people in a raw and authentic way.
Now, I know you said within a few days you were going to Canada. Like, how was that first presentation? Now, like you said, I know you said you've been authentic the whole time, but when you knew that you can literally just speak freely because it's all your material, it's something that you don't have to worry about the next day, Monday morning, somebody saying, "Hey, you know what? Guess what Jason said on the stage." Like, how was that? Like, how more can you let loose? How more can you dive deep into what you truly believe in at that moment?
So I would say the material is the material. So I've already been speaking and things. So the material doesn't change. Now, what does change is the audience that I'm in front of and what questions and where the conversation goes at that point. That's really where the freedom comes for me in being able to speak more freely and like I said, not worry about things that are going to come back. I remember one time I spoke at ICP. I regularly present at the ICP conference annually. And I don't remember what year it was, or what presentation I did, or what I was talking about, but something came back to my department where somebody, I guess one of my officers had a friend that was in the audience or something, and they said that I said something bad about my supervisors, which wasn't the case. And if I make a comment about something, I always make it general, like sitting in the chief seat. When I was the chief, I always made it general. Now, I've been the chief at 3 places. Mm-hmm. And this was while I was the chief in Apex is when this happened. So this is my last thing. And so if I make a comment about, I've had supervisors before that I had to do X, Y, and Z with, I may not necessarily be talking about in Apex, but when you're a chief in Apex, it's going to get credited to that. And so somebody went back in, and so it got back to me that, that some of my officers weren't happy and they felt as though that I was talking bad about my supervisors, which that wasn't the case. And so it's things like that, being a sitting chief, that you have to be mindful of. Whereas now, people still are going to go run and talk. And if I say something, then they may think I'm talking about this department or talking about that department. But that's often not the case, and I still try to speak generally. If I'm talking about people that work for me or an experience from work that are related to something like that.
And you're right though, and that's and I have since I've been more into the speaking track as far as like speaking at different chiefs conferences, different sheriffs conferences, speaking at the different departments. A lot of the conversation I have with sitting sheriffs or sitting chiefs, sitting wardens is what you're just saying. Even if you could be saying the most positive thing, and if one sentence is slightly out of place or misperceived by somebody, then it's like, oh, guess what Chief Armstrong said about us? And it's like, no, I didn't say it like that. But the unfortunate side is perception. And it's also even more unfortunate because while you're getting paid by that government entity, you have to be mindful of that, because if the right person complains or the right person says something that can carry any kind of like credibility to the right person's ear, now you're sitting here in the city manager's office trying to say, boss, you sent me to IACP. Now I didn't even say that, but this person perceived that. Now you're in an uphill battle, or now you're in internal affairs getting questioned by some random person because there's a misperception. So I have heard that from other people that are currently in the role, that are like, man, we really want to come speak, we really want to come share a message, but we have to be a little filtered because people misperceive, and then we don't want our agency to be misrepresented, because I think that's what it really comes down to. Because I believe a lot of chiefs, a lot of sheriffs, they have great messages, but sometimes, although it could have happened 20 years 3 agencies ago, the current organization they're in, especially if it's some government entity, someone's going to catch feelings about like, you must be talking about us. And it's like, no, I even, you could even say this happened 20 years ago. You could have been in this current agency for 3 years, and now
Yeah.
they're like, no, you were talking about us. You're like, really?
Yeah, and the thing with me, and with my experience being what it is, and the things that I talk about, and what people want to hear me talk about, a lot of it has to deal with my time in Ferguson as the chief in Ferguson, because
Yes.
Ferguson, has such a big name and a big history, and a lot of people are just, wooed by, who is crazy enough to go take the chief position in Ferguson. That guy, Jason Armstrong, was. But in talking through that, and in talking what happened in Ferguson, and why things happen in Ferguson, we just have to be honest. There's a lot of, difficult conversations that go along with that. And that's a lot of what I speak about. And I don't shy away from that. And that's something, to your point, that it's a sensitive subject at times. And that was something that I always had to be mindful of, being careful of what I said to make sure it landed how I needed to land, but then also I could explain anything that I have ever said. But Mike, I'll tell you this part, and we mentioned the book, that the book wasn't written in one day. When I started writing the book,
Mm-hmm.
that was a big, not motivator, but I would say a big catalyst in me recognizing that it was time for me to retire from law enforcement, because I found myself trying to write politically correct,
Yes.
and just really thinking through, like, all right, how my officer is going to take this if one of them picks up the book and read it. How's this person going to take it? How's that person going to take it? And that's when it really, solidified for me that it's time for me to leave and step out on my own and go do my own thing, where I don't have to worry about any of these things. And I said earlier, the freedom is, I needed the freedom to be able to write my book from my voice, and not curtail anything. And that's when I made my decision to go ahead and announce my retirement.
Yeah, it's so interesting how we try our best not to offend people, like, because that's never the goal. The goal is how to uplift, how to motivate, how to empower, especially from a leadership standpoint. And you have to think about that, like you said, especially as a chief. Like, and once you put a book out there, once you let the first copy go, you don't know where it's going. And then
Exactly.
you're, hey, one person could have been like, you know what? I want to buy everybody in Apex a book. And you'd be like, no, I can't. You're not even promoted. And next, everybody has a book. And if you wrote something that could be construed as offensive, or like you said, like when you spoke at IACP, where people are like, hey, he must be talking about me. Then now you're sitting here once again battling morale and everything else. You're not trying to do that, but it's just a natural thing. So yeah, I know that's tough. So since we're on your book, and I was going to get to that in a moment, and when you said, I said, yes, now we can talk about, I'm done here. What was the motivating factor to writing a book?
The big thing, I would say, is, so it was always in my plan to transition over into speaking once I got done in law enforcement. And, I'm one of those people that, like, I seek out people that are doing what I intend to do, or what I'm trying to do, or what have you. And so the more that I talk to speakers, and so going to all the conferences that I would go to as a chief, in the keynote, so I would stop and I would talk to them, and I would just ask them questions about the speaking game, and how all of this works. And one thing everybody kept coming back to is, man, you need to get a book out there. They was like, man, you need to get a book out, and having a
True.
book gives you credibility and people look at it differently and all those things. So it really was just advice that I kept getting from people. So that was one side of the house. The other side of the house was, you know, during my time in Ferguson, especially after I left Ferguson, and when I would speak to different audiences or what have you, people regularly came to me and asked, "When is your book coming out?"
Mhm.
Because the Ferguson experience was so unique. Even though it's Ferguson, everybody knows Ferguson. My time in Ferguson was really unique because of what was going on, and I was the chief there when George Floyd was killed, and
Mhm.
and so while Ferguson had had all of the unrest and rioting in 2014 after the Mike Brown incident, then they were going through having to navigate federal oversight. I had both at the same time. I had the same level of rioting and civil unrest after George Floyd was killed, but I had to navigate that with the DOJ looking down on me because we were under a consent decree and under oversight. So, so just a really unique experience and environment to be in. And so people regularly ask, when you're going to put a book out, when you're going to put a book out. So those two worlds, finally collided. And I had an executive coach last year when I was going through a program, and he wouldn't let me make any more excuses for not doing it. I'm like, man, I'm a chief. Like, I don't have time. I don't have time to write a book. I don't have time for this. I don't have time for that. And he just kept throwing advice at me in ways that I can navigate it to get it done. And he
Right.
stopped, letting me make excuses for it. And so finally, got locked in with somebody that could help me do it how I needed to do it. And we were able to get it done.
So when you finish your final manuscript and you said, "Man, I'm ready for this to publish," how did that feel?
It was scary as hell.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Yeah, man, it's scary as hell because to the point that you just made, like I speak from my experiences and how I was impacted by those experiences. And so while I don't name people in the book, if you were a part of my world, a part of my life, or worked in the agency that I'm talking about at that time, like you know who I'm talking about
Right.
in different things. And so really trying to find the right words to convey what that experience was for me and the impact that it had on me, whether it was positive or negative, and the people that played a part in that, trying to explain all of that where the reader feels it,
Hmm.
but also at the same time, like not taking any shots at anybody because that's not what I'm doing. And I really tried to balance it out where, I'm explaining, this is what I contributed in this space. This is what the other person contributed in this space. I understand some of their outlook on it and different things. Here's how I was impacted. This was the motivation for me. This was my thought process in it. And these are just that's just how I'm internalizing, whatever this experience was, and not trying to, like I said, to come off as if I'm taking shots at anybody or anything like that. And so man, that's a tough balancing act, a very tough balancing act. And so that's why it's so terrifying, because when you do it, it's like, did this land how I wanted it to land? Like, is the reader going to have the
Right.
takeaway to where they just get how I was impacted by this experience, and not, oh, that's a bad person right there because they did X, Y, and Z. So yeah, man, it's terrifying because you're never 100% um satisfied with it. And you get to a point where it's like, okay, like I have to let this go. Like
Hmm.
I can't keep tweaking every single word and every sentence, to the nth degree. Is you got to get to a place where you're comfortable with it. And for me, it's always, can I explain things to people? And so if somebody was to call me and like, Jason, I didn't like, yeah, you don't say my name, but I know we had this interaction and this
Yeah.
experience, and I got a problem with how you talked about it in the book, where, I'm not worried about getting that phone call because I can walk through and I can explain anything that I
Mm.
need to explain to anybody.
From author to author, I will tell you, every author I've talked to, that first book is always the hardest because we believe we have to get everything that we've experienced in our 30,
Yeah.
40, 50 years or 20 years in one book. But then once you start looking around and you start looking at other authors, you're like, wait, this author has two, three. John Maxwell has 100 books. So
Yeah.
it's like, why do I need to do it? But you're right. Even for me, that when I hit that final submit button and it had an official date to launch and be published, I was like, oh, I missed this, or you know what, I should have added that. And then I was like, you know what, I can just write another book. Like I don't have to say, I don't have to keep tweaking. And I have found people who have told me they've been working on a book for years. I'm like, what's taking you so long? They say, well, I don't think I have everything I need in there. I'm like, you're never going to have everything you need. Even
Uh,
when you think you have everything you need, you're going to think about one more thing. You're like, oh, I should have put that in there.
yeah, exactly. And even like up to the end, like we had gone through a couple rounds of editing with my editors, and then there were a couple things where I was like, I'm sorry, y'all, but I have to put this in. Like, I got these couple, and so like I snuck them in there, but then I still have a list on my phone of things that I didn't put in the book. That okay, I'll when I do my next book, I'll hit these things then.
You know, and like I said, in the pre-call in the green room before we started, I told you, I mean, I'm a student of John Maxwell, and as I was writing my book, and I realized how many books he had written before that, it had hit me about how he wrote a book called "Developing the Leader Within You." He wrote that and I might be off on the years, maybe 25 years ago, give or take.
Hmm.
About 5 years ago, he wrote "Developing the Leader Within You 2.0." So,
Hmm.
what needless to say, it's essentially the same concept, but he just added to what he already had built. So, once again, as I thought about publishing another book or more books, I had to keep that in mind. Like, you know what? Even if I think I missed something, even if I have notes written on my phone or my whiteboard, I could just add it to the next book. Or I could wait a few years and add some more concepts overall and just develop. Because as we know, even on the speaking world, the fact that like I told you, I've really been hitting the ground pretty hard the last 3 years. There's things that I have learned and now things I can even input that's different than what I knew back in 22 when I did publish my book that I can incorporate when it comes to personalities, events, experiences, like knowledge gain, wisdom. But once again, if I would have just waited, let's say I waited till this year to write it, then I'm sure I would have forgot things to put in. I would have been right back in the same circle. So
Oh,
the fact that
absolutely.
you have notes on your phone and places that you can write more, Jason, trust me, people are publishing. I've seen some authors publish a book twice a year. Like that's
Yeah.
just what they do. So I think you're on the right track. For any right track, and any chief or sheriff that are thinking about writing a book, you could always have your manuscript on standby. And then when you're ready to push it out, just do it. But don't, if you are in a position where you can push out a book now, I do recommend anybody that's kind of thinking about it or they want to get their message out, just do it. Just write it, get your editors, get your proofreaders, get it formatted for ebook, get it formatted for paperback, hard copy, audio, and just get it out there because you never know that there might be one paragraph in there that might change somebody's life. And the fact that you held on to that book thinking that, oh, it had to be perfect, you missed that opportunity. So I recommend what you did, Jason. Get that book out there. And worst case scenario, there's something you want to change down the line because at the end, you never know who is going to offend or who it's not going or who
Yeah.
is going to improve. Like you just got to get out there. And if you have the best intentions, it will always improve more people than it will harm.
Absolutely. And I have zero doubt that that's what my book is going to do for people.
Yeah, and it's only been out for, like I said, this is we're November 20th. It's only been out for 20 days, so I'm sure it's already impacted. Like I said, I saw it when you posted on social media. So actually, I need to get my copy, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes on how to do all that. But as you've navigated 23 years of law enforcement, one thing I always like to bring up, especially if I can remember to do it, is family life. How has some of these big moves impacted family, whether it's children, spouse, parents, relationships, like anything like that? Like, because I think that's the other side of law enforcement that we sometimes like not just us in the industry, but on the outside, people don't really see us as people because they're like, you know what? He's a chief. He can't have feelings. He's a chief. He can't have problems. How have you been able to kind of manage your time, manage your life, manage your own emotions over the last 23 years of being in the industry to be able to successfully now navigate out of it? But how was it during those times?
Tough. No other word to describe it, man. Tough. Especially on my family, and I have to give them a lot of credit for just going on this journey with me, especially when I made it to the chief seat.
Mm-hmm.
So I was first the interim chief in my department in Georgia, in Forest Park,
Okay.
Georgia.
So that.
And that was a rodeo experience, a roller coaster experience. And so that's when I got my first, taste of politics and just everything that comes with being a police chief. And it wasn't pretty. It wasn't pretty at all. And I remember telling my wife at one point, where I could see things going sideways. And I remember telling her, I need you thinking about how you can support me, or that you're going to need to support me, mentally and emotionally, because I know this isn't going to end well. Because I saw how things were unfolding,
Yeah.
and that's exactly what happened. And then you fast forward a few months, and now I've been offered the chief job in Ferguson, Missouri, of all places. And just, how agonizing and grueling it was to just make that decision on, was I going to take this job, and as a family, were we going to do this? And just looking at all the pros and cons that came with us doing that, and what it was going to do to the family and everything. And so I mean, I admit, and I speak about this in the book, where, my luckily I have the family that I have, and they supported me, man, they supported me at every turn. And they took on the sacrifices that they knew that they were going to have to make, and a lot of it was sacrificing me, to a large extent, because they knew that I wasn't going to be there how the average, dad husband is going to be there, with me taking on a position that was as in intense as the police chief in Ferguson. And that's also something that contributed to, me making a decision to retire early
Mhm.
and to transition over into this space. Just after a while, man, when you put people through things, and you see, and you hear, and luckily, I have a family that speaks their mind. And so they tell me when I'm falling short, or they tell me when I'm not the best version of myself. One story that I share in the book, that really changed, the landscape of just my outlook on what's important in life. I think my daughter was either 4 or 5 years old at the time. We're in Ferguson. I'm the chief in Ferguson, and just one day out of the blue, she asked my wife. She said, "How come Daddy's never happy when he sees us?"
Mm. Wow.
And so, you got that coming from a 5-year-old. And she was talking about when I come home at the end of the day from work, and that was during COVID, and so everything shut down. So they're just home all day. And so everything that I'm dealing with at work, where at that time I'm dealing with riots,
Mm.
protests, pandemic that none of us had lived through, and just everything that comes with being a chief in Ferguson. Where, all right, man, my 5-year-old, she just wanted me to muster up a smile when I walk through the door, at the end of the day. And so, you experience those things, and you start to hear and learn, how you are negatively impacting your family. And hopefully that's the epiphany that you need to make some changes or do some things differently. And as a family, we have made that commitment. And then I'm not saying that I'm perfect at it, by no means. And even now, in retirement, so now I'm hustling. And so I'm always on my phone, and got things going, and so my wife still has to get on me. If I'm at the dinner table, I'm on my phone cranking out these messages, or responding to stuff, or trying to book
Yeah.
something, or trying to get booked in this. And like, put your phone away. It's family time right now, and stuff like that. So like I said, I got a family that keeps me in check, which is good, because we all need that.
Yeah. One thing I want people to really understand of what you said, and I just did a virtual presentation a couple of days ago, and one thing that I emphasize a lot in my presentations, a lot of them based on mental wellness, leadership, how to lead people through tough times. We were taught, I don't know if you were, but I think we're in the same boat. When I first came out into law enforcement, I was always taught leave home at home and leave work at work. And that is such BS. That's such a lie. You can't really do that. That's not how the mind works. And your
Yeah.
daughter emphasized it when you were coming home during those times, and you were coming home grouchy, like you were. She was like, "Why can't you just smile to be?" And it's because we think like we have tried to train our brain. We try to lie to ourselves and say that a bad day can't carry to either side, and really it does.
Oh
But
yeah.
fortunately, like in your case, you had that family support that called you out on it, but some people don't realize it, or some families, they don't understand how that struggle really impacts you. So I tell people, as an individual, whether you're in a leadership role or you have the title or you're just in the industry of anything that's high stress, make sure you're finding ways to create some balance. Like you can't turn it off and on because that doesn't really work. But find ways to recognize if you are at that moment where you're at peak stress, figure out how to calm yourself down, figure out how to find 10 minutes for yourself. So you, let's say, for example, I had somebody on the podcast and I can't remember who it was. They said that whenever they had a bad day at work, they got with their spouse and said, "Hey, I just need to go to my room for 15 minutes and I just need to be by myself. I don't mean to do it, but I'll let you know. Like it's not an everyday thing, but if I had a really long day at work, let's say I saw three traumatic calls or three critical calls in one shift, I just need 15 minutes to myself in a complete de-stress moment." So for you and for people listening, it's good to understand like when you hit that moment, what do you need to do to help yourself get back in the game? Because you can't just turn it off and on. And sometimes your impacts people and you don't even know it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the best things for me and my family was when I read Gil Martin's book on hypervigilance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Me and my wife read the book together. So we read it together, which was extremely helpful because it helped her learn why I acted how I acted, or why, when I got home, I didn't want to go anywhere and I didn't want to do anything. And it helped her learn how to counter all of those things where she wouldn't let me get away with it because she knew, now she had a better understanding of what was going on within me and how, I needed to go do these other things. While if you leave it up to me, my answer is always going to be no. I don't feel like it, or I don't want to,
Right.
or what have you, as opposed to, hey, we're going to do this, or we're going here, we're going there. And so it's definitely things and tools out there that can help people in our profession and industry, and also, help their families, help them get through this better than some of us have gotten through it.
And as we start to close out, I want people to understand that given some of the things you've been through, whether it's your career, whether it's your family life, it's things that people can learn from. And I love the fact that you're out in the free world now, as they say, kind of promote your message and sharing like things that you've been through, because I believe there's a lot of people going through a lot of stuff right now. And whether they're in law enforcement, they're out, their family, they don't have family in it, they're going to have family in it. It's good to understand that there's people out there that have experienced parts of life. So, with that in mind, if people were looking for you, they wanted to reach out. It was like, "Hey, Jason, we want to cut a copy of your book, or we want you to come to our stage. We just want to know how you and your wife make it work." What are some ways people can reach you?
So the easiest way is my website, jasonparmstrong.com. So it has just all of my information up there, some of the topics that I speak on, some of my background and experience. And you can contact me straight through the website. Has the links to my book on the website. So that's the easiest. But then also social media. Jason P. Armstrong is my handle on all social media platforms: LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, X. And so I'm have a heavy presence on social media, especially LinkedIn, professionally and stuff. So either through LinkedIn or through my website, that's the best place to find me to get in contact with me.
Yeah, most of my viewers are based on LinkedIn and Instagram. I've done a little bit more push on Instagram over the last couple of months, but you're right. It's good to have all those resources out there. Usually, like you said, the website's the best. But nowadays, especially the Generation Z, and you got to call it what it is. A lot more people are on Instagram and stuff like that, and other social media platforms. So it's good to have all those options. What final words do you have for our audience?
Final words. One, I would just say, anybody who is is looking to take on, the challenge of leadership. And I always tell people, like, it's hard. And until you're sitting in the seat, you have no idea how hard and how difficult it is. But with that being said, we can never have enough quality leaders. We can never have enough good leaders. So we need people to be willing and have the courage to step up to take on these challenges and these roles. With that, also be open to learning and receiving the guidance from people who have been there and who have done that. That's one of the things that greatly helped me on my journey. And just, I always credit people for being generous with their gifts. Because the only thing that helped me accomplish everything that I accomplished and getting one of the most notable chief jobs in the world was a result of people being generous with their gifts and people taking the time to talk to a young man that, sometimes they had never met before, didn't know, from an agency that they had never heard of before, but they saw how hungry I was for knowledge and guidance, and they took their time to give it to me. So if you have that, be generous with it, with people. And if you are seeking that, be intentional about what it is that you're seeking. The subtitle of my book is Create Lasting Impact by Leading with Intentionality. And being intentional and being my authentic self is something that, I wouldn't let myself shy away from. And I wanted to make sure that I always held on to. Because if I was going to do it, or even if I was going to fail doing it, I would feel much better about myself failing, knowing that I stayed true to who I was, and I didn't, I didn't bend to get to somebody else's idea of what a police chief is supposed to look like, how a police chief is supposed to dress. Police chief is not supposed to have tattoos and wear earrings, and I have all of that stuff. So, be intentional about being true to yourself. And one thing that could help you learn how to navigate that are some of the learning lessons that I've put in my book. And so I definitely want to encourage all your readers out there to pick up a copy of my book. I'm done here. Create Lasting Impact by Leading with Intentionality, because I specifically wrote it not to be a law enforcement book. That's why I don't have law enforcement in the title. If you look at the picture that I use, I'm just in a suit. I'm not in uniform or anything like that. And I don't reference law enforcement in the title in any kind of way, because this is a leadership book. And the leadership lessons that I've had throughout my journey, anybody can learn from, anybody can benefit from. And that's what I want to do moving forward, where, law enforcement is always going to hold, a special place for me. And I will always do work with law enforcement agencies and entities. But what I'm building, with my business, it's not just going to be for law enforcement. And I'm looking to help leaders in any profession and anywhere in the world. And that's another thing, that we're looking to do with my company, is be more of a global company and have a global impact. Because when I talk to people around the world, I hear how much this is needed and how valuable it is when we talk about how we improve, the police department or law enforcement agencies, their standing in the community. Because that's the number one thing that I've been able to accomplish in my career, is building those bridges and building those relationships.
Yeah. And it's important to know that. I mean, a lot of people actually appreciate the background that you have, because they know that if you're able to navigate leadership at the highest levels of stress and still have any kind of success, that means that you could probably do it in lower stress areas. So I highly recommend anybody that's looking at the corporate side or the private side, when they decide to transition out of the government work. People like what we do. We just got to frame it in a way that they understand it. That's all. The concepts are the same. The terminology is just different. Literally, it's crazy how a small change of wording makes people like, oh yeah, you know what? We can benefit from Jason's book, because although he's law enforcement 23 years, he still dealt with stress. He still dealt with people. He still dealt with conflict resolution. It wasn't just like, oh, you're law enforcement, you only deal with that. Especially in a law enforcement environment, you deal with everybody. You don't choose who you deal with. You literally, whoever calls, you show up. It's not like you can say, well, I only want a client that lives on 5th Street because the clients on 20th Streets are crazy. No, you have to take every single person that calls. So being able to lead in an environment like that, I think, is always a true testament of your skill set. So I agree with you completely. definitely something that's very notable. And I hope people do grab a copy of your book. I'm done here because I do believe that there's never enough leadership training that people can get. And just every different perspective, you put them together, and that's how you build yourself. Because where someone may resonate with me, they may not resonate with you, and vice versa. They may resonate with you, but not with me. So just get as much information as you can, as much wisdom, and choose what works for you. But I'm happy you pushed that out there, Jason. I hope people, once again, either go to jasonparmstrong.com or go to any of his handles and get a copy of his book, or not just follow his content, because I know that he's just not going to leave it in the book. He's going to keep showing things up. Like I said, I see it on social media. I see where he's dropping nuggets weekly to try to give you all opportunities to be successful in any industry that you're in. So once again, Jason, thank you for being on the show. I hope the viewers had an opportunity to meet you a little bit, and I hope you can gain some followers on any of your platforms. Hopefully we get a couple of your books sold, and I know one day we'll see each other on this speaking journey, because it seems like you're hitting the ground running, and I just keep running. Sometimes I'm on the ground, sometimes I'm in the air. I don't know what's going on, but I know one of these days when we meet, it's going to be fire. So once again, Jason, thank you for being on. For the viewers watching, if you haven't had a chance, make sure you like, subscribe, and follow. If you really love the episode, make sure you leave a review. Make sure that you share it with somebody that may be struggling or may want some more information on how to just be a better leader within law enforcement, outside law enforcement, and with their family. Because at the end of the day, it's about being true to yourself. And I think Jason emphasized that a lot. Be your authentic self, and everything else you have coming will make its way. Everything that you want to do will come over time. Just be true to who you are, and that will allow you to succeed at any single level. So once again, guys, thank you. If you guys need anything, reach out. If not, you all have a great day, a great night, and be safe.
You've been listening to the LEO First Podcast. Michael has been in law enforcement since 2005. He's worked for 3 law enforcement agencies in 3 different states. He's a professional speaker who travels the country teaching about leadership development and self-awareness. And he's the author of a book called Greatness Beyond the Badge: The 3 Key Principles for Self-Awareness. It's Michael's passion to bring law enforcement members' stories to the front, so you get the real and raw take. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with Michael on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Michael Laidler, on Twitter at Michael A. Laidler, on Facebook at Michael Laidler Leadership. Send an email to michael@michaellaidler.com and hit the website at michaellaidler.com. See you next time on the LEO First Podcast.